Today for Texas barbecue, we're doing ribs, and we're preparing our ribs to be put on the grill tomorrow. We're doing beef short ribs, beef back ribs, pork St. Louis style ribs, and pork baby back ribs. So right now what we're doing is we're taking the beef ribs out of their vacuum packages to take off the back membrane on the ribs. So what I got right here are the beef back ribs, just taking them out of the vacuum package to help preserve them, increase their shelf life. So the way, right on the back, they have this membrane that we want to take off so they cook better, more juicy, more tender. So the way I do this is I just start on the rib and I just kind of cut along the bone, try to open up that membrane a little bit. Once you open it up, you get underneath it. On these back ribs, it's relatively easy. And then you just pull it off. And so I only got a portion of it off here. So now I'm gonna go over to this other side and try to get the rest off. And then I'm also gonna trim off any excess fat that we don't need. So that's roughly what our finished product will look like. I mean, it still has some membrane on it, but it's the more inner membrane. That's not as much of a concern to us. And so we're gonna flip it over and just see if there's anything that needs to be trimmed off. It looks pretty good, so we're not gonna mess with this one anymore. If we had any excess fat on it, we had a piece of fat on it, we would just trim it off, make it nice and clean. So if you have anything hanging, any tails, those will burn on the grill. So we want to make sure it's nice and square all around. There's not flaps, excess fat, excess meat. Any plastic we might still have it on it, we would take that off and just make sure it's all ready to go for the grill. I started removing the membrane. The easiest method for me is just to find the bones. If you can't see them, you can poke them with your finger, poke them with your knife. And I just go along and I kind of, at an angle, trace the bone. And as you can see here with this fat that's still left on, it kind of lifted it up a little. And so then that way I can work under it and pull it off. Just like that. And then so you just pull all along the rib, and if it starts to separate where you're only pulling a portion, you just pull that off and start again at the portion that's left on. So as you can see, this membrane is really tough. So if you leave it on, it's going to be a really displeasurable eat. You're going to be chewing on it. The meat won't fall right off the bone. That's not what we want for an ideal rib barbecue. So what we're doing now is we're using chuck short ribs. They're a lot more meatier, a lot thicker. They're from the chuck region of the cattle. They're also called Japanese short ribs because of the higher level of marbling that can be seen. They can eat better, they can have more flavor. Next we have our pork. We're doing pork St. Louis style ribs and pork sternums. These are a relatively new product. Sometimes you can find them in the store sold as pork breasts. And so the way we got these is we trimmed our pork spare ribs, took off the diaphragm, took off the sternum, and that then turned them into St. Louis style ribs. So with these ribs, we're calling them our cook's lunch. So we're gonna be cooking them up. While the rest of this stuff is cooking, these will be ready a lot earlier, and these are what we're gonna eat as our lunch tomorrow. Now for our pork spare rib, so a lot of times you can buy these in vacuum packed bags. These help keep the freshness, retain the shelf life, and when you buy these, they're relatively cheap. Usually they're not something people want, so you can find them really cheap and get some pretty good eating out of them. Our next we're going to do is our pork St. Louis style ribs. We get these from pork carcass. When you take them off, they have the diaphragm on, the sternum on. When you trim all that off, then they're called the pork St. Louis style ribs. They're pretty good eating, a moderate amount of meat on the bones, and they taste really good once cooking properly. We're gonna open up our pork St. Louis style ribs. So we're just gonna cut open the package along, whatever area we can find that opens up best. We have them in the vacuum package to help maintain freshness, increase shelf life, makes them easier to store. So we're gonna pull them on out. So originally when we took them off the carcass, they would have had a lot more meat on here, a lot more diaphragm. They had a sternum attached right here. And so we went off and trimmed off the sternum, trimmed off the diaphragm, and then that yields the pork St. Louis style ribs. And so as you can see, they're relatively lean, not too much meat, but they're relatively long. They make a pretty good eat. So the way we're gonna prepare these is we're gonna just check out the front, make sure there's not any extra stuff on it, go around back, and we're gonna pull off this membrane. So the way I'm gonna do that is I'm just gonna start on the bone and kind of angle my knife so it lifts it up. These ones are a lot harder to get off than the beef. They're a lot thinner membrane. What I just did there is I worked under the bone and I make sure I got the whole side started before I started pulling. You want to make sure you do that, otherwise if you get one side started, you're just going to pull off one strip. So I got the whole side and then I just pulled the whole strip off. It came off really nice and clean, and so now this one's ready to go. This one right here has a little more diaphragm left on it. That's fine. You can trim it off if you want. I personally like it. It adds a little more meat. There's nothing wrong with that. So check the other side once again, make sure it's all good. This one's nice and trim and clean. And this last rib right here, I'm just going to go ahead and trim it off. It's really little, it's barely on there. When you start cooking, it has the chance of falling off because the meat will kind of shrink up, and so it won't be attached very well. So I just trim that off and scrap it. You can cook it up if you want. It's personal preference. We are with the final St. Louis style ribs. They're all ready. We're just gonna season them now, and then we're gonna let them sit overnight and then throw them on the grill tomorrow morning. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull the sternums out of the cryovac bag, vacuum pack. These are sometimes called pork brisket, pork breasts. They're really inexpensive, really cheap, pretty good eat, a lot of meat on them. We got these from pulling them off of our St. Louis style ribs. So I'm just going to open up the package now and find a nice good spot. So here's our pork sternum, pork brisket, pork breast. As you can see, there's a lot of meat on it. Right here's the sternum. It was attached to the rib right here. And this is the whole diaphragm that we trimmed off. There's a cartilage in it. So you have to be careful when eating it. Make sure you trim it all out, but a lot of meat. It'll cook really good. It'll eat pretty good. All this white stuff right here, these little white dots, all it is cartilage. It's relatively small. It's about that big in there. And you can trim it out if you want, or you can cook it. cook it with it in. Either way is fine. Just when you're eating, just cut it out and